Before we actually start the video, just gonna let you know there's a link to our Discord in the description. Alright, enjoy the video.
Neurology, neurology, psychology, and how it compares to humans. Hello my disciples. Today, we'll be going over the neurological and psychological differences between Tralanga and humans. But before we get into it, I need to disclose that we will not be going too deep into actual neurology like signal compounds, nerve firing patterns, and other nerd stuff. However, we will be talking about the brain cells later, as they're actually important for this video. Anyway, getting right into it, we will be starting off with the brain's physical structure. On first glance, a Tralanga brain and a human brain look pretty similar. Both are around the same size, the Tralanga one being very slightly smaller. But if you look closely, you will notice that it looks significantly more ball sack-like, possessing a lot more folds and grooves. In humans, these folds are called the gyri, and the grooves are called the sulci. They exist basically to make the brain more efficient by making it take up less space inside the head. Tralanga have more of these because their brain actually contains more neurons than a human brain and needs to be more compact to fit as a result. How much more they have compared to a human we do not exactly know, although they have probably 20 to 25% more brain matter based on how many extra folds they have. Now moving on to a cross-section of both brains, you will notice both have similar sized gaps inside. These are the ventricles of the brain. These hollow areas allow the brain juice known as cerebrospinal fluid to flow around the brain. Said fluid doing a few things. It keeps the brain buoyant, cushioned against impacts, and protects it from infections, regulates heat, and brings it essential glucose, proteins, lipids, and electrolytes. But interestingly, Tralanga cerebrospinal fluid has two noteworthy differences from human spinal fluid. Firstly, its bright neon yellow color, like your urine after an energy drink, unlike human spinal fluid, which is clear and colorless, as it stores more essential materials than human spinal fluid, which gives it its color. And secondly, it contains special protein spring structures known as bumpers, which exist entirely to absorb the shock from impacts, helping to somewhat give the brain extra protection. These proteins are produced by the bone marrow, passed into the spinal fluid via blood cells, and are circulated around the brain. When an impact happens, the coil-like protein catches some of the energy wave and intentionally breaks apart to safely disperse the energy, and its leftover parts get recycled. Otherwise, they get taken apart and replaced every 12 hours by the body as they quickly break apart, which is actually how the body knows that they need replacing. Speaking of the spinal fluid, now to move on to the spinal cord itself. There are very few noteworthy differences, except one. Tralanga have a second form of spinal cord. This cord can be found in all winged relatives of the Tralanga species, and several other species that have the same method of flight. But the flight system itself is for a different video due to how complex it is. Anyway, this cord is part of that system. Although it exists to mainly stop high voltage from lightning strikes and electrical predators, like electric eels for example, being as lethal or damaging or absolutely frying the flight system. Said cord starts around the base of the skull and runs down inside the middle of the actual spinal column, splits at the hip, and leads down into both legs, coming to a stop at the feet and toes to conduct voltage away from the vital organs. It's also composed of highly specialized nerve cells, is rich in copper and other conductive metals. It's wrapped in a layer of very specialized and flexible cartilage cells, ones made to be as insulative as possible. The cord has simple electrical diode-like segments that force voltage away from vital organs, and the actual composition and functioning of the nerve cells involved is so different from a standard spinal cord that they are basically a whole new type of cell. Essentially, they have an organic electrical cable running through their spine made of highly specialist nerve cells. Speaking of those nerdy nerve cells, time to talk about the ones in the brain itself, which surprisingly function very similarly to human ones, albeit with only a few differences. Firstly, they tend to have shorter axons due to being closer together. Secondly, the myelin sheaths on each axon, which are what makes the brain run as fast as it does, are significantly more efficient at speeding up neurological communication, as they use a more efficient combination of materials in their voltage-gated sodium channels, which is basically the thing that speeds up the actual neurological signal. I will try to explain exactly how this is done, but I am not an expert neurologist, and the Tralanga have access to elements that do not exist in our planet, so there's no point in me even trying. Anyway, and thirdly, some parts of the Tralanga brain have neurons with multiple axons. This is mainly the lower, more primitive parts like the cerebrum and the cerebellum. This is because they have 8 limbs and need to control those limbs properly, especially if one gets damaged, and they need to figure out how to move without it. And with that, we have covered the physical, neurological differences between humans and Tralanga. Now to get into the psychology part of the video, which is going to be quite a wild ride. Mainly because, as a topic, it is quite complex, so I am going to have to skip over a lot of the fine details on how stuff generally works, because psychology varies and is not actually an exact science. And with that out of the way, now to actually begin. Starting with how Tralanga generally operate day to day, it's pretty much the exact same of how you would do things. Wake up, get ready, probably eat breakfast, and go about your day. Talking to people, making friends, working, etc, etc, etc. However, where Tralanga mainly differ from humans is how they mentally process what they are doing, how they deal with stress, and how they react to certain things. When it comes to their mental process for tasks, they're generally more methodical, calculated, and cautious. As a result, they're less likely to misspeak and have fewer oopsie-daisy moments. They tend to take longer to do things as well. This thinking process developed as they evolved due to how much actual planning was needed to bring down their heavily armored but preferred larger prey. They would need to observe it, notice joints and weak spots, and use weapons perfect for what they were actually hunting. Bigger animals needed longer spears they could have a better chance to hit vital organs, for example. Regarding how they process stress, Tralanga are generally better at coping with stress long term than humans, except in the case of post-traumatic stress disorder, yet tend to panic more easily in unexpected stressful situations. This is because they were often preyed on by larger, more powerful predators during their pre-civilized stages of evolution, so they had to get away from predators often, making them naturally easier to spook. Not only that, but said predators would be persistent, and they would just have to get used to being stalked and running till the animal either gave up, or they finally got a weapon and turned their pursuer into a fine red mist. And with that, now we can move on to the most interesting part, that being how they react to certain things, which we're going to go over as a list because that's the easiest way that I can tell you all of this. Anyway, now to get right into that. Firstly, Tralanga have very strong maternal and paternal instincts and a powerful desire to protect younglings, even if they aren't their own. Also, I'm gonna need to clarify this before I continue. I have to use the term younglings because YouTube for some reason will turn the comments off if I call them what they actually are, so we're just gonna have to roll with it. However, this desire is so strong and hardwired in, adults will rip and tear anything apart that they consider a serious threat to a youngling's life. This even includes other Tralanga, as they have an inbuilt zero tolerance for P words, also known as fiddlers, which is also something I can't exactly say what it is because YouTube will downrank and annihilate this video's performance for some reason. Why upon God's green earth? I do not know. But regardless, Tralanga basically have a hardwired and pure hostility response to anything that can kill or seriously hurt a youngling. And for good reasons, because predators would often target younglings due to them lacking fully formed wings being weaker and their exoskeletons not being fully formed and kinda soft, making them an ideal snack. Also, on a side note, this hardwire is so strong that most fiddlers will often end themselves before they hurt anyone or directly after. However, some of them just don't have this instinct and will keep going and fiddle-diddling until someone catches them, calls in backup, and they proceed to turn said fiddler into minced meat. But the creeper carnage does not cease there. If the fiddle freak somehow ends up surviving and is put in prison, the other inmates will most of the time finish them off with some very creative and brutal ways. I personally would want to tell you because I, Father Andrew, the one writing this, absolutely despise those who diddle and fiddle younglings, or think such a thing is somehow morally justified. But sadly, YouTube will age restrict and derank this to hell and back if I even try, so I can't. But anyway, we will move on again. Secondly, Tralanga are naturally against cannibalism and are hardwired to not engage in it. However, this has two exceptions. First, being if they are starved to death, which is something humans will also do. Secondly, being if they lose a limb or body part, in which case they will often eat their own missing meat to reclaim the materials and growth hormones, speeding up the regeneration and replacement of said parts. Thirdly, male Churlanga generally prefer females that are around the same size as them or slightly taller, and females generally prefer males the same way. Why exactly is not known, though it seems to have roots in their anti-fiddle-diddle instincts. Fourthly, Churlanga generally enjoy having their exoskeletons scratched and scrubbed with a firm, stiff brush, as this removes whatever debris or filth is activating their elements. Fifthly, Churlanga can generally rub one out to completion the same way as a human, but they last longer, perform better, and have a greater time if they do the horizontal mambo with someone of the opposite sex and both are consenting. This is due to chemicals released by the genitalia when aroused, which enhance their performance and dopamine reception. I would go more into the actual chemical process involved, but that will be for the endocrinology video. Processing onwards, sixthly, Churlanga prefer circles, arches, pillars, and other smooth or round shapes in their architecture, because most of them consider squares and triangles and cubes to be unnatural, hexagons being the only exception to this. The exact reason why, even they have no idea, but considering how rare it is for nature to make straight lines, I can kind of understand why. Seventhly, Churlanga have zero interest in the same-sex relations for a few reasons. Said reasons will be discussed in another video when we actually talk about how they reproduce. Eighthly, Churlanga females, due to having a similar amount of testosterone to men, will generally grow to around the same size, have a similar attitude, muscle mass, and bone density, yet will still have an obviously feminine shape, have boobs, and wide hips. In summary, they're mostly built and act like tomboys. Ninthly, most Churlanga like the colors orange, green, and purple, while most humans like blue. For humans, blue is a common choice because it actually causes the brain to release more dopamine and serotonin, and tells the brain to stop producing melatonin, the stuff that makes you feel sleepy, keeping us awake during the day. But for Churlanga, they like orange, green, and purple because they are the three most common colors of light produced by the various glowing plants and fungi that live in the caves that they came from. The light from said fungi and plants also made prey more visible and easier to locate, giving them an evolutionary reason to prefer those colors. Tenthly, Churlanga tend to be more cooperative and have much lower rates of psychopathic, sociopathic, manipulative, and generally selfish behavior compared to humans. This is because teamwork and actively working together as a group greatly increase the chances of their survival prior to developing civilization. And, on a side note, tribes would also exile the selfish and generally lead them to their own thing, which often led to said exile getting annihilated either by an animal or someone else. And, 11thly, Churlanga don't really care about clothing as their genitalia are internalized, which will be further explained in the reproduction video again. But in short, there's nothing really to see on the outside. The only times they really wear clothing is when they need to do something specific that requires it, like going to work or being out in certain weather or doing specific things that necessitate it. And with that, we have covered the psychological and neurological differences between humans and Churlanga. Sadly, I cannot cover every difference, so a lot of the tiny ones had to be skipped. And I was unable to cover the mental issues that they can develop and their telepathic abilities, because those are better off having their own videos. But regardless, once we're done with the biology videos, I may make a compilation of niche little facts about the Churlanga body and mind for those who are actually into that small detail nerd stuff. Anyway, my disciples, before I end the video, I just need to say thank you all for the support. It really means a lot. Every like, comment, share, and view keeps this channel going. And with that, I'll see you all in the next video.